Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to talk about The Bands of Mourning by Brandon Sanderson. So as usual, we're going to talk non-spoilery thoughts and opinions up front, then move over to the spoiler section where we can talk in more detail. So with that being said, remember to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and let's begin. So, The Bands of Mourning is the third book in Mistborn Era 2, and this book basically is super Cosmere heavy. It's the fun Cosmere stuff. Well, magic system heavy more than Cosmere heavy. But the entire thing really centers around the Bands of Mourning. The Bands of Mourning are a mythical object supposedly owned and held by the Lord Ruler from the original Mistborn Era 1, and it was, items of great power, and everybody wants it. So that's what our crew basically is dealing with this time around. So Wax, Wayne, Marcy, and Steris, they're all dealing with this entire situation that I won't really spoil. So I've been fairly candid about my dislike of the Western genre. I made mention of it in the previous two reviews for this series. But in this book, I don't find it as grating as I did in the other ones because it seems to be a much more minor part of the story. A lot of it takes place in the city and then like outside of the city, going to a direct other location, not so much just hanging out in the Old West. And the majority of the story is propelled by the mystery and all this understanding or lack of understanding about the Bands of Mournings and trying to figure out the mystery behind it and like this lore, how real it is, because a lot of people don't even believe it exists. Like I didn't at first because based on what I know about the Lord Ruler, it didn't technically make any sense. But there's a lot of time that we just didn't know anything about Rashek, so he could have done all kinds of stuff. Apparently, even as a kid, and I didn't know about that. So that actually leads me to a lot of questions. Like, his bloodline is still there. That's a whole other thing. We'll talk about that later. Yeah, let's talk about the characters. So Wax being our main character, he continues to be pretty decent. I like him as I have from Jump. I think his maturity level and his no bullshit attitude is really refreshing for characters of this type. Because like a lot of people that are like lawmen or like detectives and stuff, they, in my experience at least, they meander a lot. There's like a lot of like pontificating and stuff, and Wax just doesn't do that. Wayne continues to be my favorite character. He reminds me a lot of Lopin, just more toned down and a lot more like mature on a different level. And he definitely got the lion's share of the development in this book, as well as the second book, to be honest. And it was needed because this character had the most stuff we needed to understand about, had the most just damage and trauma and all this kind of stuff. So it makes sense that he got a lot. And Steris also got a lot of development. We kind of learn more about the inner workings of her personality, how she sees it, and how she feels about other people's perception of her personality. So it's fairly interesting the way that all played out because it's quite different than anything I've experienced before. And Marcy, she's fairly solid. Like, she didn't get too much development in this story. She got like a little, like what I would consider like an end cap on her entire character development. But a lot of fun stuff does happen with her, but we have to talk about that in spoilers. So similar to any other Western, though, the story is fairly straightforward and fairly predictable. But a lot of the fun stuff that is in it is just all purely the Cosmere stuff, in my opinion. When we get towards the learning about the Bands of Mourning and understanding what they are or what they were and like how they work and all that stuff, that's the stuff I really was sinking my teeth into. Because, I'm a huge world builder person and magic system and lore. So to sum up, before I jump into the spoiler section where I can talk in more detail and hopefully be a little bit more coherent, let's sum up and say that Bands of Mourning is about the mystery of the Bands of Mourning. We follow our normal crew, and they are basically trying to figure out this information that's given to them by an unknown conjurer person. And it has all this information and details and stuff that leads them to learn more things about Southern Scadra, which I'm really happy about. Even though we only get just a little bit of it, I like really seriously need a Southern Scadra novella like yesterday, Brandon. And yeah, so the story basically hinges on them trying to figure out everything about the Bands of Mourning and traveling and dealing with it and dealing with the people that also want it. And there's a little bit of Legend of Korra kind of feel season one in this one too. There's a bit of an issue between the Allomancers versus the non-Allomancers. It reminds me a little bit of the conflict between benders and non-benders. So I kind of dug that a lot too. That was an interesting part of the story. So now let's jump into spoilers so I can hopefully be a little bit more coherent about the stuff I'm trying to say. So spoilers for Bands of Mourning by Brandon Sanderson. So let's start off talking about Wax. I want to talk about his whole situation first because that's really what stuck with me. So Wax's development at the end of Shadow of Self made so much sense to me because he was basically being played as a puppet by Harmony. Like everything he did was a manipulation by his god. He got like Harmony got Wax to kill his wife twice for cosmic related reasons. He had an explanation of like, so just in general, you can completely understand why Wax was like really, really pissed at Harmony and didn't want to do anything for him. Didn't want, all that kind of stuff. So when he actually gets to talk to Harmony this time, like more than just through the earring, because this spoiler section, so he dies and he has a Harry Potter in a Deathly Hallows moment and like goes and talks to Harmony in this, the sub-astro of Skadra, which is just all mist. But in my head, it looks like King Cross Station in that Harry Potter movie. So he's walking around talking to Harmony, and Harmony is basically explaining to him, like, he did all of that stuff because he knew if he did it a different way, he knew exactly how Wax would have reacted, and it would have been much worse. Like, had Wax not killed his wife the second time and Harmony had someone else do it, he knew that Wax would have been incredibly pissed off that somebody else did it instead of having him do it because he at least loves that person and stuff. So Harmony had him do it knowing that that situation would happen. So it was basically explanations like that over and over. So Wax is just sitting there like, you right, but I'm still mad. So like, I thought it was hilarious, but it makes so much sense. Like, I love the development of Sazed as Harmony too, because he's so different than the way he was in Era 1. He is like fully formed as a god. He's doing things that are basically all morally gray. He is manipulating people as puppets, but it's for a, I guess, greater good. In reality, he was trying to keep a slave because he wanted the Conjurer to remain under his control, but the Conjurer wanted freedom and chose death over freedom. And it was just, death over servitude. And it was just like, so I like this idea that Sazed isn't, who he was back then. He's much more different. And I like the idea that the two shards and tints are starting to bleed into his personality. Like I don't know if he's much more okay with ruining stuff, being destructive or whatever, but like similar to preservation. I guess that's the reason why his explanation works like that though, because he was telling Wax not, like, he can't prevent all bad things from happening because basically eventually you won't have a life, you won't live at all. It'll be just as preservation, the original preservation, wanted it. Like everybody would be stuck frozen in stasis forever preserved, never progressing, changing, or doing anything. But he has ruin also, so he has this understanding of destruction and death and like all this kind of stuff. So it should make him a lot more even kilter, but as we know, well, if you've seen my review of Secret History or read it, then you know that it kind of would lock the shard from being able to really do anything. So I just like the way Brandon really handled it. It's a lot more interesting, and I really like that Cosmere perspective stuff. Like, that's another reason why I really like Secret History. So the way all that plays into Wax's development, so it's like, it's almost, so I really like the way this all plays into Wax's development because it almost makes it feel codependent. It's like the development of Sazed as a god directly reflects on the way Wax had to be developed throughout his story in order to be Harmony's sword, shield, creature, character, person thing. And that entire implication makes me wonder if he's going to have greater Cosmere stuff later, or if this is a practice run and Harmony is like creating a weapon for like Odium later. Like, yeah, I'm not even going to speculate about that too much because the time dilation difference between Era 2 and Roshar and all of that stuff that's going on is just, that's, yeah. So yeah, that's basically Wax. Wax story is probably the most complicated to be the most simple character, but it's where all the good fun stuff happens. It's where you start scratching your head and just start wondering about romantic theory and just how a lot of this stuff works. So I enjoyed it a lot. But Wayne, who gets like super real deep, like legit character development, he reminds me so much of the character from the first Wonder Woman movie, the one that was in her crew that like couldn't shoot, like he had like such traumatic PTSD and like just had trauma from being in war and all the stuff that he was a sniper, like he was a marksman, like that was his whole shtick, and he couldn't even shoot a gun. So it's similar with Wayne, like he can't even pick up a gun, but in the situation where he thought, actually knew, no, because Wax actually was dead. In the moment when Wax was dead, he got pissed and was like able to use a shotgun. And like, I love how later he kind of plays it off. So he tried to play it off by saying it was a shotgun, so it doesn't really count because it's not a handgun. And I like that because, it's still clearly totally affecting him, but he's, just trying to kind of brush it off. So a lot of that was really good, like him dealing with the situation that happened previous. So the way a lot of his development kind of comes full circle in this story works for me a lot. And there's probably going to be even more, assuming Lost Metal is a fourth book in this era and not the first book of the next era. And apart from Wayne getting like this huge amount of development, we also get a lot of development for Steris. Similar to the stuff that I was saying about her in my Shadow of Self review, this is where it really happens in this one. This is where she like talks about her lists and stuff, the way she always comes up with pretty much every eventuality she can think of, and she has it on the list, and like checking stuff off the list. And like when she like my favorite thing about Steris in this book is what happens when she starts talking about evaluation. She's evaluating basically everyone in their crew on a scale of like 1 to 100. And based on their usefulness and their skills and everything they can do, they get a score. And she scores herself a 7. A 7 out of 100. That's like, for one, that's self-honesty, that's self-awareness, that's like, and self-deprecation at that and all this stuff. But like, it's not just that. It's not just like her being overly modest, like saying I'm, clearly not as useful as any of the Allomancers, or her sister who's like a markswoman, I guess, and like all this other stuff. She's like, but she does recognize and understand her value. She understands that she has value and all this stuff. Because there's like a point that comes later where she, in order to save the Southern Scadrians, because... So what happens later in the story, she gets this really cool hero moment where she saves the Southern Scadrians by having carved a recess or a cavity into her notebook and kept some of the heating medallions in there. So when they were basically freezing to death in 40-degree weather, she showed up with the medallions and like saved their lives. She like, I may be 7 on the scale of 100, but I still have my uses or whatever. So I really like that. It's like confidence in the things that she fully understands that she can do without being arrogant or over blustered or having a higher opinion of herself than she really should. So I think that's really cool. And it goes from her being basically, timid kind of thing, like just wanting, like understanding, not even understanding. It goes from her feeling like Wax wouldn't want to be with her because she's just like this clerk kind of person. And he just wants to marry her as, contract thing because high society situation or whatever. And so it kind of takes her all the way to this point of like when her and Wax legitimately are together and he proposes to her not as a situation of duty but like as an actual proposal, and she's like, this wasn't on my list. Like she thought of every eventuality and didn't ever think of that. I thought that was like the perfect culmination of the way that story arc worked. I thought her stuff was really good. So Steris is like my number 1 on character development. Then it's Wayne, and then Marcy, because what Marcy does at the end is really cool. So while Wax is dead because he gets crushed because he's fighting the I can't remember what Suit. I think Suit was his name, which is so stupid because he's just his uncle and they call him Suit. Like it's whatever. It's probably the least original name Brandon has ever used. Like it's just yeah. But in any case, he's dealing with Suit and like gets killed. And Marcy is in another location dealing with basically the people who have been using hemalurgy to give themselves artificial allomancy. Not even artificial, but give themselves allomancy because they're the non-allomancers who want to deal with the allomancers and stuff. The whole factions thing and everything. So she's over there dealing with that. And she's the one that makes the realization. She starts to think about it probably pretty much at the same time Wax is, that the bands that they found probably aren't the actual bands because everything that leads up to that area where the bands were was all off. Like the glass case wasn't the right size. Like it wouldn't have made sense to go over those. Like all kinds of little stuff like that. So he was thinking about it like, yes, this temple and this place where the bands where we found them, this had to have been a decoy. And at the same time, Marcy was thinking the same thing, but she's like outside and she's got the spearhead that they pulled off of the statue that was in there. So she's out there thinking like, maybe it was all a decoy this, blah, blah, blah. And she like takes the spearhead and realizes she can tap the metal mines, and then she drinks some vials of metals and she can burn the metal. So she has the bands of mourning, but it's just basically a spearhead. It's like so she's holding this chunk of metal and has all 16 powers of a Mistborn and all 16 powers of a ferochemist. So she's basically a god at this moment. Not even basically, she's a fucking god at this moment. And literally it's so cool. It's the coolest little piece of action in all 3 of these books because Allomancers, the power of allomancy has always been slightly nerfed. It's not like surge binding and stormlight where you can literally fly or turn anything to another thing and stuff. So the fact that Brandon writes in this part where she can literally fly by pushing herself off of trace metals in the ground and stone and stuff is so cool, because that level of control of allomancy is implied to be possible with other people. It makes me think about something that's technically a spoiler for Dawn Shard, so I'm not going to talk about it, but it makes me think in that direction. So if you've read Dawn Shard, then I think you might know what I'm talking about. So in the moment, like when she has the bands of mourning, when she has the spearhead, it's so weird calling it bands of mourning because it's one spearhead. Like, I don't know, that's just weird to me. But like, I mean, yes, that's the ruse and that's the point, but like, it still comes off as vocally weird to me. But like, so she has that and she's basically making short work of everyone and like flinging people around and flying around doing all this stuff. And she eventually gives the bands of mourning to Wax, who, while being dead, having this conversation with Harmony. Harmony basically says, you can go back to Earth or you can just go on and you can just, go be in peace and be dead. And he's like, well, of course, because he's the hero of the story, he has to go back. And she gives him the bands of mourning. So we got Wax just out here running around being an absolute badass. And it's just like, he basically cleans up everything. Like he deals with his uncle and like makes peace. Well, actually he doesn't, because that's Steris, because that's another thing why she's so awesome. After everything kind of calms down and they're dealing with the Southern Scadrians and they got like this floating ship thing and everything, like she does all the negotiating to help them leave, separate peaceably and all this stuff. So I thought that was really cool, and it promises a lot more of Southern Scadrial. So if Lost Metal is fourth in this era and not first in the next era, then maybe that's where we'll get more Southern Scadrial, and I don't have to keep begging for a Southern Scadrial novella. So I think I'm going to go ahead and wrap up this very rambly, mostly incoherent review here. So have you all read Bands of Mourning? What was your favorite part? Let me know in the comments down below. So as always, remember to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and I will talk to you all next time. Peace.